A realistic watercolorist in Ontario, Canada, and it's Canada Day, so welcome. Welcome back if you're a regular, and today we're going to be talking about a, um, a swan painting that we're going to do in watercolor. If you're looking for the reference picture, it is in the description below, so you can find that there, and let's take a look. So this is the reference picture that I'm going to be working from. I took this a few weeks ago, well, actually 2 months ago, about that long ago. Anyway, what I really liked about this particular reference picture is the darkness of the background, how it emphasizes the whiteness of the swan. So if you're out taking your own reference pictures, this is something that you'll really want to do, especially if you're trying to do a bird or something like that. If they blend in too much, which birds often do, because they're often very camouflaged and that sort of thing. But if you have a white swan, for example, you want to try to set it up in such a way that you can potentially have a darker background. In this case, we have some of that beautiful light sort of bouncing back on the bird, and I want to really capture that in this particular sketch that I'm going to do today. So I am going to be working with a watercolor block, or it's not a block, it's a pad, pardon me, it's a travel book, and it is 6 inches by 10 inches, 140 pound or 300 gram, and 15 by 25 centimeters. It's a cold press paper, coil bound, so that you can fold it right underneath. And the only thing I've done so far is I've drawn a little border. That's it. I'm going to be using my watercolor palette, which I created out of a simple eyeshadow. So I just took the eyeshadow out and put the paints in, and I sanded up the lid, and that makes my mixing area. So just don't sand it too roughly if you're going to make one of these, but use something very only slightly abrasive, right? So very high, like I used, I think, a wet dry sandpaper or something like that, just to get the writing off of the box and all of that kind of thing. But I'm going to start off with the drawing, and I'll be using, this is just a regular pencil, but it's an F, which is kind of a drafting type of pencil. It's just a regular one though. An HB would be fine. And in terms of drawing this out from the reference picture, I do like that this is kind of uncluttered, this reference picture. There's not a lot of noise in it, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you get a lot of weeds or grasses or tree branches and things like that, and it ends up being a lot of texture and a lot of busyness in the picture. So I really liked how clean and the design of this is quite nice. So I'm going to start off by estimating the halfway point, which I'm guessing is about here. So that's going to tell me sort of where I need to place my bird. If I can just sort of from here to here work out the halfway point, then I can start thinking about things. I could do the same at the top here. The halfway point would be approximately here. So if I follow that down, I know that the back, the curve of the neck of the bird is going to follow right along that halfway point. The tip of the tail is close to the halfway point as well. So it's a little higher, and it's pretty close to the left edge. So here we go. I'm going to just, and I'm drawing lightly to begin with, because anything, especially on a white bird, or anything light or yellow or something like that, any of those things are going to show every single pencil mark. So you want to keep your drawing as light as you possibly can. Now, when it comes to the rock, these edges are really crisp and they're dark. The shadows are really dark. There, I can actually do some darker lines. But on the actual bird, I have to be careful. So I see kind of a triangle shape here. That might be a little large. Let's make that a little smaller. the reflection comes down from there, and it actually extends down. It's quite a lot longer, as you can tell, than the actual tail itself. So I'm going to bring that down a little further. And there's a reason for that, and that is because my viewpoint was kind of looking down. If I were eye level, these would be equal, but because I'm looking down, I'm seeing more of that tail that's coming up out of the water. So it extends a little further. So I'm looking at this angle, and I always think of my angles like hands on a clock, right? 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, etc. Well, it's not quite 3 o'clock. It's not quite, I wouldn't say 2 o'clock. So it's somewhere in between. So this angle is going to come up something like this. And same with this angle here. There's kind of two angles here. We've got this angle, and then we've got this angle. So from the tail, I'm going to come up at maybe a 1 o'clock angle, and then down at maybe between a 3 and a 4 o'clock angle. So if this were the middle of my clock, this would be like, I don't know, 17 minutes after 8 or something like that. So the curve, now the halfway point, let me see here. The neck has to come round there. That's a halfway point. So my neck is going to bend back there in this kind of a manner. It's going to curve up. Now I want to make sure I don't come up too close to the top here. So I'm looking to see, okay, how much space do I need to leave? Maybe half of what the overall bird is there. Or I could say from here to here, this is the halfway point. This might be approximately a third of the way. So if this were the halfway point there, and this is the top, third of the way down might be here. So that'd be the top of the head. Right? I'm looking at the distance from here to here. That would be about a third of the way. I'm estimating, of course. I'm not measuring anything, but I am estimating. The bottom of the chin here, I'm looking at that. There's another angle for us. That's coming down at maybe a 4 o'clock angle. And it is a pretty straight line, actually. The underside of the neck. The beak angles down just a little more. And I've got the bird pretty center. I think I've got the neck too large. I actually think the whole head is too large. So I'm going to make that correction before I put in any details. All right, I don't want things out of proportion. I don't want to start painting and hope it'll fix itself, because that never works. But I'm going to come up and make this a lot smaller here. And that's going to make more sense to have that less less large in relation to the body. Okay, so now I can start refining things. Now that I feel like the placement on the page is approximately where I want it, I can start refining, and then I'll add in the rocks in the background. So that's kind of my take on how I begin my drawing. And if I have any incorrect lines right now, I'm going to erase those just so they don't mess me up or get me confused in any way. This, I can start sort of refining this shape. So this isn't just a straight line. This is kind of an angle here. the neck comes down and it's a little bit curved, so I'm fixing up that curve there and that sort of thing. And this is sort of my thinking as I'm going along, how I'm working out the right shapes and so on. I'm looking here at this little curve here. It's not quite straight. It's a little bit of a curve, angling down. Now we have the reflection of the bird as well. So again, it is it's mostly the shadow part here. So basically what's reflecting isn't the back of the bird. The back of the bird can't reflect in the water, right? So I'm basically seeing a reflection of this shadow in the water, and it is roughly the same size because it's angled back. I don't want to get too technical about it, but it's angling back, so that does change how much we're seeing. This tail's flipping up more, so we see it elongated a bit more. Okay, so I'm just estimating where the head is going to be. It comes a little lower than the tail. All right, so the head's going to come down here, and it's a real wobbly line, but I really want to make sure that the head is in alignment with the reflection here. That is so important. If it goes off to the side, or if it goes left or right, it's going to feel very weird. Okay, so I'm just checking here. If you have a question for me as I'm going along, please put it in the chat in capital letters. That way I can spot it really fast. Lots of Canada Day greetings. I'm very happy to see that. It is oppressively hot here today, so I am not outside as I originally had hoped to be. So I'm going to be, I'm in my studio, of course. And when I do get a nice day, I'm definitely heading outside, and we'll get some plein air work done. Okay, so I've got to watch it. I have this tendency to want to inch over a little bit too far, but that's probably because I've put the neck, I've started the neck too far over. So I'm looking, my eyesight is like this. So if I were leaning over to this side, I'd be looking at it from this angle, and that could throw me off. So I'm going to look straight here, and it's going to be more of this sort of a placement. Okay, so that's the general idea of where the reflection's going to be. And you'll notice that the neck looks short here but long here, and that is because of the angle that I'm looking at. So instead of trying to rack your brain and try to figure out all of these angles and everything, use your eyes. It looks short here, draw it short there. If it's not as long as what's up there, just don't think about it being a reflection. Think about it being, oh, that's a kind of a hook shape, and then doesn't have much of a length. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of. I'm not looking at it in a realistic manner. I'm looking at it in more of an abstract approach. So this shape here goes wobble, wobble, because of the little bit of motion in the water. And then there's more wobbles. There's even a break in this. So there's the tip of the beak right there. And now I can refine some of these other shapes. This the opening of the mouth, the beak there is got this really dark line, so it's pretty prominent. There's a little bit of a hook on the end of the beak. I'm going to include that. And I'm looking at this angle here for the beak. That goes up to kind of a 1 o'clock kind of angle. Then we have the nostril. And there's this eye placement here, which is not too far behind, but now there's so much of this white bird that's in the sunshine. It is difficult to see any of the detail. That's actually a good thing, but it's very difficult to see any of the detail. So I'm just going to focus more on, is that shape approximately the right shape and size, proportion to the rest of the bird. Kind of a dip, and then the other wing comes up slightly. I really don't want to draw a lot of detail on this bird because, of course, as I mentioned, it's all going to show. Whenever you do something really light like this, it will show every little detail, every little pencil mark. So I do have to be quite careful about it. Keep the drawing as accurate as possible, but as minimal as possible, if that makes any sense. And now I can start thinking about the rocks and the shadows and all of that kind of thing. So the actual rock is up here somewhere. This is shadow in the water, right? So part of this darkness is the shadow in the water. And so that is pretty close to where the top of the wing, this hump of the wing there is. So I'm going to put that across here. I hope when I'm talking about the drawing process that you're finding that helpful, because if you start with a drawing that's not accurate, how are you ever going to be satisfied with your painting? It's kind of tough, right? So I hope that these explanations are helpful to you. If you'd rather me just get to the painting part in these demos, then just speak up. I like to hear your feedback. Any improvements that I can make in my demonstrations it's always welcome. Even if they're, I mean, you don't have to be mean, but I'm happy to hear any of the ideas you have, and certainly any subject that you want to learn as well. I'm always looking for suggestions. I'm just fiddling around with some shapes on the rock there. I don't need to worry about that too much, but I want to get the rock behind. There's a big shadow shape here. The rest of the rock kind of comes up, comes down where the top of the head is there. And another rock. Now I could also rearrange these rocks. I mean, because it's just rocks, right? I could rearrange these rocks in a way to better suit my design. If I really wanted the face to show up a little bit more, I could move this rock up a little more, which would make a little bit more dark right around the crown of the head. So why don't I do that, just to show you that this can actually improve on the photo, which is, it's a pretty nice photo, but I'm going to see if I can just bring this up a little more. Okay, bring that up a little bit more. Then we'll do it doesn't have to be shadow all the way around, but if I can capture a little bit more of the head there, I think I would be quite happy with that. That goes off. Then we have right about from where the eyeball is, we've got this dark shadow coming up. Big crack in the rock. And a lot of this gets lost in shadow. Now, there's going to be the shadow in the water as well. So I'm going to find the reflection here, and it's got that same wobble because of the motion in the water, right? So this isn't going to be a perfectly straight line. It's going to have a little wiggle. That type of thing. And it's always a horizontal wiggle because of the water surface. Then we're going to have some that comes up. Now this is going to come a little lower now because I raised the rock up a little bit. So this reflection will come down a little bit lower. And when you have painted lots of water reflections, and I've mentioned this before, if you study something, you're just going to get better at it. I wish there was a shortcut where you didn't have to do all this practicing to get good at something. But there is no magic bullet. I mean, I suppose you could just conjure something up with AI, but how do you feel about that? It's not something that you're going to feel proud about because it doesn't feel like yours, right? It doesn't teach you to observe. You're probably going to forget all about it in no time flat. So it's something that is you just need a little bit more time spent working on these things. So I'm going to come in with, this is the reflection. This is the shadow. So there's a difference, right? So the reflection casts like it sort of shades this area so that you can actually see through the water. But this is extra dark, and it is like a cast shadow from the sun. So this is coming up here and then down on an angle. And then there's a few little white bits in the water, and I'm not going to draw those in. I'll just have pencil marks all over my painting. So I think I've got it pretty much the way I want it. This format was a little bit skinnier than what I had here, so I had to kind of cut off this edge a little bit. You know, I shaved off a little bit there to fit my format, and that's fine. I don't think it really compromises the composition at all. And now I'm going to take a small brush. Let me rummage around here for a couple of small brushes. I'm going to use my squirrel hair brushes today for no particular reason, but I just want to. So these are just travel brushes, nothing special. You can use synthetic brushes. They're rounds. It's basically what I'm working with here. I might actually use a flat as well, but let's take a look. Sorry for here's what I'm looking through. this bucket full of brushes here. So it takes me a while sometimes to find what I'm looking for, but there we go. So I'm going to start with, I think I'm going to start with the rock, just get some of the rock painted in here. You notice my drawing was pretty minimal for the rock. I want to give myself some opportunity to improvise a little bit as I'm going along, and I don't really need a lot of detail on the rock. So I'm going to be using, I want to be using raw sienna. I'm using my flat brush for beginner, or for the start, I mean. So raw sienna, it's like way too yellow. In fact, I think I might mix a little burnt sienna in there as well. But both of those colors are like really warm, and this doesn't look as warm. Like it's warm, but it is very light in color, and it's not a bright yellow or a bright orange. So I need to dull that down. If I go to the complement of yellow, purple, I can neutralize this. So this is a purple that I have. Let me pull this down a little bit. All right, so let's see what happens when I mix all of this. And you'll see that it's going to look very kind of a dull. It's going to dull it down. So if I add a little more purple, it gets even duller, you see? So the complement's going to dull it down. Now, one thing I want to have, do I have one at my disposal? I have a little bit of paper at my disposal. I want to try this out. Now, that's going to be too dark. I need to thin it. I need a thin color in order to be able to capture the part that's in the light. So many times you look at what's here and you think that, oh, that's too dark, and you thin it down, and then you do something and it's like you have to do it again. But I need, in this case, I need a thin color in order to get that. Now I'm too red. I'm definitely too red here. So I'm going to go with more of the more of the raw sienna, adding more yellow, adding more purple. Now there's a fair bit of red in this purple. If I don't have it right, I could add a little blue. A little bit more raw sienna. So it does make a difference whether you're using a red purple or a blue purple. That gave me too much of a red, so I'm going to try with more blue in it. Thin it down, and I'm much closer, right? So that is a better match than the first one I had. Even though both were thinned down, adding that bit of blue made the difference. So I'll take some time doing this kind of thing as I'm working out my colors. If you're painting realistically, this is kind of the color matching that you'd want to do. But more importantly, the value matching. So that thinning down of that color is of utmost importance. So I have the right color now. I'm going to thin it down, and I'm just going to paint in a thin wash. I'm working on dry. I could wet the area first if I want to, but if I keep filling up my brush and working quick, I shouldn't have a problem. If you keep filling your brush and thinning it down, spreading it out, working fast, I should be able to get this in without too much difficulty. But a lot of you might prefer to wet the paper first in order to get this smoother. But they're rocks. I don't care if they're smooth, so I'm just going on dry paper, which I would do if I were at the beach and I were seeing this swan in person, painting it from life. I don't have time to wet my paper. I'm just going to dive right in. Going carefully around the bird's head, and I'm going to carry this right down into the water. In fact, I think it could be even a little darker in the water. So I'm going to use it a little bit more full strength right here. In this section that's being reflected, it seems to be a little bit darker. And that's because the The water's shallow, so we're actually seeing the bottom of the water here. A little darker there. I could go even down here into this shadow and go darker as well. One of the reasons I like working on dry paper, because it's easier for me to hit the right value first time. If I work on wet, very often I have to repeat myself a lot because I end up having to go back in and do it again because I didn't get it dark enough. And that type of thing happens to me quite frequently. So if I work on dry, it's much easier to see the value, the correct value. And I usually end up with something a little closer to what I actually want. So we have the lightness of the rock right here. I have the darker reflective shadow here. And I could even come down into the bird. Remember here I said that this is shallow water. We're getting a similar reflection here for the shadow side of the bird because the water is shallow, and we're actually kind of seeing through the murkiness of the water, which probably is picking up a lot of the bottom of the water here as well. So I'm coming down into this area and I'm going to paint where I see this similar color here. And when I'm painting water, I find that the flat brush is quite good because if you work in a sideways motion, it helps to naturally give you the curves of the water motion there. So let's come up here. I find these abstract shapes pretty interesting in water. Now, oddly, there's like a blue oval in the middle of the head here in the reflection. That's just the distortion of the water. So I'm going to leave that little gap so I can put some blue in there. And the rest of this, there's going to be a little bit of different color in here as well, but I'll do that on a second layer. But at least that's going to remind me where that head needs to be. So it's quite similar in color. And you can always take your little squares. I've talked about these squares many times. And they're just cardboard with a little hole cut in the middle, and you can make a comparison. You need two of them because you need to put one on your reference, one on your painting to see if value-wise you're close. And I can see I'm a little light here. I may need to go back in on that one. I've got a bit of a blossom happening over here. That's okay. I need to go a little darker there too. Now, if this similar is close to that shadow, or this shadow or something like that, I would have to wait for that to dry because this is a hard edge. If I did it while it was wet, I'd end up with a fuzzy edge there. So that wouldn't work very well for me, and so I would need to do it separately. So what else can I do? Now I didn't do this part of the bird. It's slightly different in color. It's a little more blue. So I'm going to take and add a little bit more blue to this. It's not quite as dark, so I'm also adding a bit of water. at this stage of your painting, there's a very good likelihood that you're thinking, ooh, that's too dark. But that's because everything else you see is bright white paper. Very often you can get thrown off by the whiteness of the paper, and that makes you think that you're putting something down dark when in fact you're not. So again, that's why these can be so useful. Now I will have to wait for things to dry. I can't just put this down on wet paper, but what I can do, which I wouldn't be able to do if I was plein air painting, but what I can do is take a dryer to it. So I'll take the dryer and just give this a quick dry. This is actually a heat tool. There are a couple of questions. You love the drawing? Okay, good. I'm glad you're enjoying the drawing part. I know the way that I'm talking about the clock angles and stuff, that's a little bit kind of unique to me, I guess. Not a lot of, I don't hear a lot of other people teaching watercolor or drawing, talk about clock angles. And younger people who don't know how to read an analog clock might have a little trouble with that concept. But for me, this works in my brain. So I hope it helps you too. You like watching the drawing process and having you talk through your thinking and planning your instructions have been helpful to me. You like the format as is. Good. Okay. Then I will, looks like most of you are in agreement that you like seeing the drawing part of it. I know it does make my video a little bit longer, but I think it's probably an important part. So I am going to come in and I'm going to bring a little bit more of my original color back here. I'm going to take some more raw sienna and come into this a little bit more that purple. That's kind of where I started here. And I want to come into this shadow. Now, the one thing about the shadows is that this dark part here, this can always go on top. So I don't need to avoid it. The only reason I might want to avoid something like that is if I can't see where the lines go. So if that's the case, like if I'm worried about losing my lines, what I will typically do is just do a little version. Let me go with I'm going to go with a neutral tint here. So I'm going to go neutral tint, and I'm going to darken this shadow. So if losing lines is your big concern, I would just come in with something darker. Doesn't have to be really dark, but darker. Being really mindful of those shapes, working around them. Oh, came down too far. Right, so here, and then across. Shaping that beak really carefully. This is just neutral tint I'm using. A lot of times people ask, is neutral tint something you mix? No, it's just, you can buy a tube of it. And it's a little bit different when you buy from different manufacturers. I believe mine is Winsor Newton. I had a Da Vinci one and I ran out of it, so I replaced it with Winsor Newton, which seems fine. All right, so there we go. I have that shadow shape there. Yep, I have a little bit of a mess. I'm not worrying about it. I'm just going to block in these dark shapes. And then once the dark shapes are blocked in, then I can come up to these ones here and not worry about losing all my pencil lines. So this doesn't even have to be the darkest value yet. And I know this is again, a bit unusual. Usually you would work from light to dark. But if I put something dark into my painting at a fairly early stage in my process, what I find is that it helps me to estimate the rest of the values a lot more easily because I have the dark for comparison. When it's only surrounded by white paper, it can be very disorienting in terms of figuring out values. So I'm just finding some of these dark places here and painting them in. I'm still using this flat brush, but I could be using a round if I wanted to. There's a dark crevice up here. I'm going to pop that in there too. I'm not at that much of a risk of losing those, but since I've got it in my brush, I'm just going to add that in. And we've got this kind of dark crevice here as well. All right, so I'm rinsing out my brush now. And I want to try to replicate a color like this. So if I took that same neutral tint and blended it into what I already have, in fact, I think it could be a little bit more purple. Put a little blue in there too, because I wanted more of a blue purple. If in doubt, check it out. I made a little poem. So if in doubt, check it out. So I'm going to test to see how close or how far off I am. And I think value-wise, I'm pretty good. I'm a little more purple, which I actually don't mind. So I'm going to go with that. I think I'm quite happy with that. Having the exact color is less important than having the correct value. So I'm going to just come in and I can go over what I've already done, and that will darken that shadow even further. And then I don't have to match up these darn lines in between, which is really annoying when you have to do that. So I'm going to carry down into this reflection here as well. That's where I had that little blossom, but I'm kind of covering it up now anyway. Okay, so there's one side of the rock. You can still see the dark. You can still see the reflection, and everything is a little bit different. They're very similar. They're all connected because I'm kind of glazing over everything. That unifies everything that I've already done. So I'm going to continue adding some of these shadows. And if I continue using this brush and I'm kind of scratching it on the paper, so if I don't load it too much, I can get a little bit more of that lovely rock texture. Now I could definitely darken some of this, so I'll just come back in and find a spot or two to add a little bit more darkness. But I want this corner here to be really noticeable. So I want that jaggedness of that rock to be convincing. So making a little bit more contrast there. There's I barely touched it, so they left almost a little gap there. All right, so let's try up here. And once again, I can use kind of a dry brush effect here to get the rock texture. But I like these kind of harsh angles. That really feels like this is a rock, a jagged type of rock, not a smooth rock, you know. Now I'm not going to come down into here because I really want that a little bit more golden. So I'm just going to come down into the dark shadow and stop there. And I'm going to continue using this where I need it, and then I'll come in and I'll start changing up that color a little bit. So now I can make this rock actually show by careful placement of the shadow behind. Just kind of scrubbing it on there to get that jagged texture. I can shape behind the rock again with kind of a dry brush effect. You can tell there's almost nothing in my brush. I have to be careful though that I don't make an outline. I've almost got a little bit of a line that I went around there. So I'm going to have to be extra mindful of that. I'm going to blot my brush and just dry brush this a little bit. And I'll be able to come in if I need to with using a little bit of white paint if necessary, but I think I'm probably going to be fine. This is a background. I'm not too concerned about, you know, being totally a match to the photo. I have the photo. So, but I do need to get this shadow here. This was kind of a key shadow. A little bit more paint in my brush because this one's pretty solid. So this is the part that's really going to make the back of that neck and everything really stand out. So I don't mind this being as dark as it is. In fact, I changed up this rock a little bit just specifically so I could capture that extra dark right there. Not looking for a perfect smooth wash because that is, it's rock. So I don't mind having a little bit of brush mark or lines in there. It feels completely normal. There's a few little hits of this kind of dry brush effect on the top of the rock. Look for the angles, right? So this is kind of a line going this way. This one's kind of a line going another way. It's not just dab, dab, dab. I often see this when you have a like foliage or something like that on a tree, and it's like all little perfectly identical little blobs. So be mindful of these shapes. These are not just blobs. I know it's probably not the most crucial thing to have it look like the photo, but it does need to look like rock, and it does have some form, and recreating that form is quite important. So the rocks are starting to shape up. I need to do a little bit more over here. So a little bit of a scratchy dry brush there, scratchy dry brush effect here. Try to get rid of that line there, smudge that out. And I really don't want to hide the highlight areas of the rock though, because that's what creates the form. Now this I think could use a little more texture, a little bit darker shadow here. So I can come in with more layers. That just adds more texture and helps me to create the form to make it even more convincing. Almost out of color here. Okay, so I have the right type of texture there. Is this my own photo? Yes, it is. I took this, when did I take this? I took this in Ireland, believe it or not. Now, I had said that I wanted to have a little bit more of an amber color down here. To me, I'm seeing a little bit of burnt sienna. Maybe a little raw sienna as well. And I'm going to mix that into what I have left. And I'm going to thin it down a little. And glaze this into some of these areas. So I'm going to take this area here. I darkened with a little bit of glaze of that burnt sienna, raw sienna mix. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So this rock doesn't start where the shadow is. It starts somewhere up higher. So this is going to end up being up in the shadow as well. So I'm taking the same color, I'm glazing this over top. Okay, I think I could even take a little of this in this area down here. Leaving the swan for last, obviously. But I want to get this nice sort of golden color from the water. Okay, so I've got a lot of these warm colors in my background now. I've even got some of the detail and stuff. I do think I could darken a few things up in here. For example, up through here, I think I could darken some of this a bit. Pardon me. And have to be mindful of that shape there. Okay, so that's a little bit darker, and that's really starting to give a better impact for the light. If you don't have the dark, you can't portray the light. So I'm going to rinse my brush, clean off this little section here on my mix area, because I want to go to some nice clean blues now. So this blue, is it cerulean? Is it, this is ultramarine? Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to test out my color again. Running out of space on this little card, but I think I can find a spot or two. So that's ultramarine. It's pretty close. I was thinking I might have to add a little bit of cerulean, but ultramarine by itself might be just about right. I'm thinking that's a pretty good match and a pretty good value, but I'm obviously going to need more of it. So I need to prepare enough before I start painting. I don't want to be kind of trying to get more paint on my palette before, like, middle of my wash kind of thing. Now, I do want to leave certain white areas here and there. So as I'm working along, I will be leaving some white areas. I'm starting on the left because I am right-handed. You would do the reverse if you were left-handed. Do I need to follow every one of these precisely? Of course not. But I need to be aware that they are there. The secret when you're working on dry paper is fill your brush. Keep filling your brush. I've got enough paint here that if I spread that out, I could spread it out, but by the time I come over here and then back again, that will have already soaked into the paper and I'll have a line. So it's better to just load your brush, put more paint on the paper than you think. As I was talking there, I came a little too close to my brown. I might use some white paint at the end if I have to, but if I can leave the white of the paper, that's what I prefer to do. So there's definitely some white along the back here. And there's a slight white margin right along the edge of the neck. You can see it here, that white margin, because the back of the bird's neck is in the sun. So you have these little bits of white showing. So these are things I'm trying to be very mindful of, and I may not be putting all these little speckles in the right places. That's not really that life or death. But the ones in the reflection of the bird are pretty important. See, this paint is still wet enough that I can come back in and keep adding more paint to it. This edge, I would need to keep that wet. Let's just put a little extra color there so I can fill up this corner here and keep going. I will take a look at the chat in a moment, but I gotta keep going. This isn't the time for me to answer the phone or do anything like that. And even though I tried to make enough paint, I still ran out. And that's because I'm loading up my brush so much. So always make more paint than you think you're going to need. Otherwise, you're mixing on the fly, which can be kind of stressful and potentially problem causing. I'm going to do a somewhat straight line there. It doesn't really matter anyway. It's a sketchbook. And see, I'm able to connect that. Might have a few too many little dots in there, but I've got a few, and I think that makes the water kind of interesting. And I am aware I need to fill that little spot in there, but I got to finish the big area first. The blue can come right up on this other side because that's the shadow side of the swan's neck. I'm coming up finally to the wobbly rock shadows. I may have to switch brushes to get in here. I don't think this big square brush, flat brush, can get into those areas very easily. So I'm going to switch to my smaller round. I do find that I tend to be a little bit more, I slow down a little bit when I'm using my round brush to get into these shapes, which is one of the reasons I like the flat brush. Plus the flat brush can potentially keep painting a little longer than the round because it covers more real estate, reducing the chance of having a lot of brush marks in your wash, that sort of thing. So I've got my overall wash there. Got a little bit of a blossom there. Not a big deal. That's a pretty easy thing to remedy, and I'll just come back to it after it's dry. So I don't need to fuss or play with that right now. If I have a blossom, no big deal. If I'm going to make a blossom just to show you that, you know, it's not something to panic about. Not that blossoms are all bad. Sometimes they're great, but I'm going to do a blossom right here. And that's going to push the paint out of the way and make a ring. And there we go. So I've made a blossom, and I'll come back and revisit that to show you what I would do to remedy that. Thank you, Brazen-Hearted. Okay. So far, so good. We don't really have a ton of questions. Now, I do want to use a little bit of this blue on the swan. You can definitely see that there's some reflected color there. So I'm definitely going to be using some of that. I also see, however, some of this sort of a warm golden color on the back of the neck in this little portion here, but under the wing, that sort of thing. So I'm going to use a little bit of that raw sienna. Now, raw sienna is really yellow, so I might want to warm that up a little bit. I don't want to turn it green, so I'm going to keep it away from my blue, but I'm going to have some, let me pull this down a little bit. I keep pushing it up. Little raw sienna. And I'm going to put a little bit of permanent rose in that. And permanent rose is like a pinky red, right? These are primary colors I have here. But if I use them correctly, not put them all together, I should get some really neat effects in some of these shadows. So I'm going to take a little bit of that red, mix it into the raw sienna. It was too much red, so I'll bring in more raw sienna. So now I have this color here is a little bit golden. It's golden, but it's a slightly almost a peachy golden. So it's pretty good right there. And there's just a little bit right here under the wing as well. There's a little bit of that color there. But there's definitely some blues there as well. So these are the subtle things now that we really need to pay attention to on the bird. If I want to make sure that the back of the bird is looking really smooth, like rounded, I want the shape correct, because I always start with the form before I start putting in any details. So I'm going to dampen this area here with clean water, because I already have my colors ready. Clean water, and I'm going to dampen this area first. I find sometimes dampening the area first does make a difference. As I said before, though, I might not have time to do that, in which case, if I don't have time to dampen it, or if it's a problem, if you're working in the sun and it's like just drying it as fast as you're putting it down, you have to work on dry paper, then what I would do is I would rinse my brush and manually smooth out that line. That's what I would do. So, but if I have the opportunity to dampen it, I will have a smoother, rounder effect here. Oh. Pick that up. Just wanted the middle part of the back there where the two wings separate. And you can see I'm not using a lot of color here. I'm keeping it quite soft. Now I'm going to do the body. I'll do the head separate because there's actually a kind of a crisp line right here. That gives me a chance to take a break, right? Like, so I don't have to tackle everything at once, which is good. Now I'm going to take some of this golden color here and start putting some of that in that little spot there. All right, now some parts of this actually look a little bit gray, and that's where I can overlap all the primaries together, and it will give me a little bit of a grayish result. But I don't want to hide all of what I just did. That's that little bit of glow that I'm going to get. One of the other things that creates glow is having a fresh color next to a dull color. So it helps you to realize what's being illuminated by the light. I'm going to take a little bit more of that golden color, and I'm going to put, maybe I'll put some burnt sienna in it, because this tail has quite a dark color relative to the other areas, and I'm working on dry here. Well, it's a little too bright. So if it's a little too bright, that's a better problem than having it too dull, because if I have it dull and I need it bright, that's harder to remedy. So I'm going to start off, even if it's a little bit of a bright color, I'll start there. It's a little bit too red. I can dull this down with a bit of blue. Quite easy to make that leap. So I'm going to manually blend, blotting my brush and getting that blended in. And now now it's continuous. So that's working pretty well. Still no detail. I think I probably could use a little bit more blue right up here. And it's not going to blend as much because the paper's beginning to dry a little bit more. So that means if I have to manually blend it, so rinse and blot my brush, I'll just come along those edges with my blotted brush and I can soften. So that's what I'm going to do. Just manually soften some of this. But it gives me that little bit of a brighter blue right along that sort of transition area where it goes into the really bright white. Okay, one of my favorite parts is going to be doing the neck, and I'm going to go once again with my raw sienna permanent rose combination, like I did here. And I'm not going to wet this because it is a smaller area, so I'm just going to work, which means I can thin the color a little bit more because I'm working on a dry surface. But I need to fill up my brush if I'm working on a dry surface. So this side of the neck is quite golden looking, and the underside of the chin is quite golden looking. The remainder is more blue. So I'm going to take that same blue, and here's where it's important for me to leave that highlight on the top of the head, and that can just be white paper. If you're looking at it at the photo, you might see, oh, there's a bit of color there, but you don't have to put it in, not in something that you're working this small, and we're not going high detail here. Oops. So I'm coming in here on this other side of the neck, and there's a little sliver of light right along there too. So I'm just going to leave a little, I think I filled it in a little bit more than I wanted, but again, I could use a little white paint in the end. That would be not the kiss of death. It's fine. The art police won't come after me. But that little shape there helps to define the top of the wing where we left some white paper. But it's giving us that gorgeous lighting effect that I'm looking for. Those golden bits, that is the part that gives you the glow. That is the magic of painting white, is having a little bit of this golden aspect here. This is quite an important part. It makes it feel like that warm sunshine. Okay. Why paint the reflection separately from the water? I thought they're supposed to blend, not separate shapes. The reflection separately from... are you talking about the rock reflections? Thought with watercolor you add reflection color into the water. Yours looks great. Why paint the reflections separately from... oh, from the water. Oh, okay, that I got it now. Why is the Swan reflection separate from this? It's because the water is cool color, the Swan is warm color, and I wanted to keep this clean. I wanted to put in a little bit more detail there. If I need to sort of make it feel more connected, I am going to bring some of these blues down into here. So that's going to help fill that in and make that feel a little bit more connected. Sorry, I think I need a sip of my coffee. That's what I need. Okay, so now if I want this to feel even more rounded on the neck, if I want that lighting to feel even more pronounced, I can simply build up the color. So I'm going to, if I take this, I'm going to make a little bit more blue, a little more of my golden peach color. I'm going to mix them a little bit just to make it slightly more blue, not quite as vivid, because it is a little bit more gray on the bird. So if I start coming in and darkening the core area, the core shadow here, the core shadow, if you're not aware, is the deepest part of the shadow. Manually blend it, so I'll blot my brush and just run along the edges there so that I don't get any hard lines. This one I don't mind. This one's actually the bright sunshine, so I don't need to have that perfectly crisp, but you could soften it slightly. Right? So when I make that even stronger, that feels even more round. It feels more like the sun is stronger. We're really portraying that sunshine even more. So again, I just take a little bit of that, mix it together with my blue, and I could come in and do a couple of very thin layers here with some darker blues, kind of hinting at some of the feathers, but I really don't want to get into a lot of feather details. But I'm going to come in and soften some edges. It's also adding a little texture to the bird as well. And now more to that golden color. If that golden color isn't so much in the light, like let's say here, it's kind of a mix. It's not quite the golden color, but it's not quite the blue either. So it's kind of a combination. I can start to indicate some of these creases and things like that. Some of the texture on the tail, just little strokes here just to give me that effect. And I think while I've got this deeper color, this duller color, I'm going to go into my shadows now and start building up some of the darks in the shadows. So I'm going to again manually rinse and blot my brush, and manually blend that edge. You'll find it difficult to manually blend an edge or soften an edge if you haven't put down enough wet color. So if the color you put down is too dry, you're going to have difficulty softening that edge. So put enough color down that you have time for the rinse and the blot. Then you can soften that edge no problem. Now this little mix I'm doing here with all of the primaries, I can start leaning a little more blue or a little bit more warm color and adjusting as I need to. So if I want this part to be a little bit more blue, and there's a lighter part in the shadow here, I'm going to leave that. But I'm going to start darkening in the shadow here. And I'm manually softening that edge. I think this one I don't need to manually soften it. I think I can just leave that a little bit of a crisp edge right there. But it's not a straight line, so it could be a little bit softened, or a little bit, not softened, but it can be a little bit irregular. It doesn't have to be straight. Still could be a little bit darker. And I'm seeing that, but if you ever need to check, grab your squares, place it here. Like, look how dark this is. It's like crazy how dark that is. Now, I'm obviously a lot lighter. Well, maybe not that much lighter. I'm pretty close. But it hasn't dried yet, and so I do think I need to add a little bit more. And so you see I'm introducing those blues from the water. I still want the white reflections there, so that's why I didn't carry that all the way underneath. There's a little bit of that golden glow there, so I'm going to put some of that in. I feel like I'm playing with that area too much, so I'm going to just back away from that one now and add a little more under the tail. Great thing about reflections is that they don't need to be perfection. There's too many wobbles in the water. There's too much tension or motion in the water. It's like ever changing. So, you know, if you're a little bit off, don't hit the panic button. It's not worth it. A little darker here where the neck reflection is. And again, it's a little browner in the water because it's picking up the color underneath the water. Okay, so there's not too much left here. I do need to get the orange of the beak. So I'm going to clear a spot. Now I'm not going to use my pink red this time. I'm going to use my orange red, which is, it's called Rose d'Or. It's a good, it already leans towards orange. And I will take I'm going to take a bit of my gamboge, mix that in so that I get an orange color. Red and yellow make orange, of course. So I'm taking gamboge. This is a Da Vinci gamboge, so it's a little bit brighter than some of the other brands. It's also a mixture. So I'm going to come in, get this orange beak, a little lighter at the tip. And I'm going to have to dry that before I put the beak on, or the face markings. So I'm just going to take my dryer and get this dry before I do that, so I have a clean edge. Then I'm going to, pardon me, I'm going to come back to my neutral tint. This time I want it kind of full strength, so I want it as dark as I can. This is going to be the star of the show, this little bit here. So this is the eyeball. And it's got a name, something, the knob on the front of the beak there. It's got a name and I can't remember what it is, but it comes up down and it runs all the way down the length of the beak. And it's very slight, but I want to get that little bit of light right on the very top. That little bit of light on the top is kind of a key way of separating from the rock behind. Now I do see a couple of things that I could darken to make the light show even more. So I think I can darken this rock and darken this rock even more, because I think it's going to make the swan stand out even more. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to rinse this, I'll clean this off, and I'm going to go back to my original mix. A little bit of jumping back and forth, but my original mix was raw sienna. I used a little burnt sienna as well, but mostly raw sienna. And I added a purple, but this was kind of a pink purple. You can see it's very much a pink purple, so I needed some blue in there as well. So that's my mix. Pretty close. So I'm going to come in here and darken further the shadow of the rock behind. kind of holding my breath as I go around some of these things. But I really want to I want to pronounce the shape of the swan. And it goes back to the very beginning when I was taking the picture. I lined up in such a way that this would capture that dark behind the swan. That's what really makes it show up. So that makes it really a lot more pronounced. But it looks like my neck might be a little bit fat here. So I'm going to darken this up and make that correction. That just feels like it's a little bit too fat. So I'm going to clean up this edge here. It's a bit better. I do see some other things I can still do to the swan though. So I'm going to add the rest of this rock stuff in. Kind of dry brush some of it. Get the texture going. But I'm happier with the rock now. As is typical with watercolor, it, you know, dried a little bit lighter. I probably wasn't as bold as I could have been because I was seeing so much of the white paper. Those are all things that will affect. Now, I do need to do something in the reflection. In fact, I just realized I've also missed that little hole there. Somebody probably put in the comments and I missed it. But this little hole here needs to be filled in with that blue. Kind of odd, but that's the way the reflection was working. And I do feel like this reflection is too pale. So I'm going to come in with a little more of my mixture. Maybe a little bit more. Get this overall a little bit darker. I'm going to soften an edge here, so I've blotted my brush and I rinsed it and blotted it. It's not, doesn't need to be a lot darker on the neck, but the face needed to be a lot more, this shape needed to be a lot darker. That's feeling a little better now, except for the beak. So the beak, I'm having to remix my colors here because I didn't tie in the reflection at the same time, but I'm going to go with my Rose d'Or Gamboge mix again. Now this doesn't need to be that bright, and I'm not going to be putting it on white paper, so that's fine. It'll have a slight orange, but it won't be as clean as what I put up here on white paper. But I can get the same kind of reflection there with that same coloring. All right, so that's got now a little bit of that orange, but it's still too bright. I've still got to put in some of the dark markings there. And I feel like I could even dull a little bit of this blue. It feels a little bit too bright blue. So I'm going to just come in and go over some of this with a little bit of that orange color. Soften my edges as I go down because I don't want a hard line there. But I'm just using this same mix, that kind of brownish mix. Just like to put the bright colors down. They're easy to dull, but it's hard to get them back if you go too far. So this is an easier way to sort of ease into it. You can glaze in. If you do too much of this, you can create mud. So, I mean, take it one little micro bite at a time as you're doing this kind of thing. A little bit more through this area. Look how dull that got really fast, right? So you've got to really take it easy. Rinse and blot, manually blend it in. And you have to go small little increments when you're painting with white, because if you can just go too far. Now I'm speaking in terms of color. The values really have to be there. Like you have to have the correct value, like lightness or darkness going on in order to portray the right form and the right just the right form. Basically, if you want to replicate the light in the correct way, you need to have the values figured out. So I'm building little by little. You can see why some of my larger paintings do take me as long as they do. I'm working pretty microscopically, you know, just these subtle things I'm looking for. So I'm just doing a little bit of blending just to soften edges and things like that. I feel like this isn't strong enough, but part of that is because I lost the little bit of white edge there. So I think I can take some white, and I wouldn't do this until the very end of your painting, but I could take a bit of white. And I'm just going to use a small brush for this. And this is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, but a white gouache would be fine. Pretty much any white will do the trick. And I want to come in along this edge and just sort of reinforce that little bit of white along that edge. You know, there might be a couple of flecks in the water you could add in. Clean up a little edge where I got overly enthusiastic with my shadow color there. But I wanted to make sure that this shape is right, so I can smooth that out a little bit. Try not to use too much white on my paintings. I just feel like it doesn't look quite as good as the white of the paper, but you know, if you need to get some white back, that's great. I also want to put, and I'm not going to have much on my brush here, but I want to distinguish the eye, and I'm just putting a little line there. I might have to zoom in for that one. Now this is pretty small. Like you can see, compared to my finger, this is a pretty small eye, but I want to get just the shape of that eye worked out. Oh, missed it a bit, so I'm going to take the neutral tint again and just hold my breath and try to get that shape right. There's no real bright glint in the eye because think about it, we're looking at the shadow side of the eye of the swan, right? So okay, so now I just have the most minuscule little glint, little hint of where that eye is located. I'm not going to try to define it. It's too small. And just the little things that I do, like that's a very small thing. The little strokes that I put through here, they just hint at the feathers. So I'm not painting every feather. That's craziness. But if you needed to imply a couple more, like for here, for example, you see those little bits of white? I could put a little hint of white here and there, just to imply that shadow a little bit better, or the highlight, I should say. In fact, what I'm seeing here, now that I'm looking at this, I can actually make that shadow a little bit stronger. So I think I will. And I'll stay zoomed in because it's such a small area. And I'm going to take a little bit of that blue color that I had earlier. Let's see if I can get all this on here at the same time and still let you see close. So I'm going to take a little bit of that blue. I don't mind if it gets a little dull, so I'll mix it in with some of the stuff that I have on my palette. And I want to come into this area here and just give it a little bit more of a clean edge right here. Blotting my brush to soften this edge. I want to leave this one crisp. I like that. That's that little bit right here, which is a little bit of a cast shadow, I suppose. You can see a little hint of that. So if I come in and I just find areas where I can just push that dark a little bit more, I can intensify the feeling of light by intensifying the feeling of shadow. So if I get that a little bit stronger, you can feel the light a little bit more. So even though this is a very small, like, I mean, that's how big it is, right? Not very big. You can still make a big impact on a small painting. If you pay attention to the light and dark and the warm and cool on the neck here, for example, the warms and cools will really portray the light even better. In fact, I think I could even go so far as to put a little bit of that golden light. Let me try a little bit of golden light on the back of the swan. So these are like the little tiny increments that I will add on to a painting just to intensify that feeling of glow. So the warm against the cool. I'm going to put a little bit along this, just that back part of the wing there. I'm blotting my brush and I'm blending that in. It's just small, but it can make a big impact. That little glow in there. Oh, that's so yummy. So I love doing that. And I'm going to just zoom out now so you can see the entire painting. Because this is something you should do at the end of all your paintings, is stand back. What does it look like from standing back? You'll see right away, oh, I need to darken this, or oh, I need to darken that. And this, I immediately see, I could probably darken in there a little bit more. So I'll just take some of that dark, come in and just build that a little bit more. That was neutral tint. But I don't want to have a hard edge, so I will blot and manually soften that edge. And that's a little better, I think. You can always take your squares, which I dropped on the floor. Here's a couple more. So you can take your squares. You can check, okay, am I the correct value? You can check your color too, but it's the value that is more crucial. I'm definitely more blue on the neck, but am I as dark as I need to be? So I think I'm as dark as I need to be. I think it looks fairly similar. And so you can go around your painting and check all of these things, right? So, yep, pretty good. So far, so good. Oh, I do need to do one more thing on, I need to get that neutral tint down here in the reflection. See, that's what I'm noticing right away too. I need to have the correct value for this area as well as everything else. So I'm coming in with some of that neutral tint, and I'll go a little stronger right here where I have the kind of the reflection of the beak. Doesn't look like it doesn't look like a swan in the reflection. It's kind of a strange alien type shape, but there we go. So now I have that bit of a reflection there, and that's feeling a bit better. Put in just a couple of little spots of that same gray just to break up that shape a little bit more. And I think I'm done. So I think that moving this shadow to like raising it up to show more of that arch of the neck actually helped really focus in on the face of the bird. And I think that that was probably a good call. I see a number of you. Oh, yes, the blooms. Yes, thank you, thank you. The blooms. Okay, so let's talk about these blooms for a second. I did say I would go back to that. Thank you for that reminder. And then I see quite a few discussions about paper, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm zoomed in here. This water was ultramarine blue. There was no mix in it or anything, so I'll just clean this off, and we're going ultramarine blue. But before I can do anything with the actual gloss, or like, you know, this bald spot here, so this is where I dropped in the water and it made kind of a darker ring around it. First thing, get rid of the ring. So I'm going to take a little brush, some clean paper towel, and I'm going to get rid of the ring. So that's the first thing. This is a terrible brush. Hang on a second. I think that's a brush I use for masking. This is another masking brush, but it's just a little tiny brush. Nothing fancy. So I want to get rid of the ring by just dampening only the ring. Don't dampen stuff around it, but the important part is blot as you're softening up the paint. So first thing, get rid of the ring. You can see I'm picking up a little bit here. I may have had a little bit on that towel before, but blot gently. A lot of times I'll see people and they're like pressing with all their might because they really want to get it off, right? And it like that's kind of the intuitive thing to do, but really what you're doing is pushing it into the paper more. Soften the paint and give it a gentle blot. Soften it again and give it another blot. I'm not pressing hard. I'm not being aggressive with it. You want to keep your paper in as good condition as possible. So I'm not using anything scrubby. I'm just dabbing a little water on. That's it. So the ring is pretty much gone. Now I can take my blue and what I want to try to do is match what's around it. Let me dry what's there first. Okay, cool it off. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of blue and I'm going to paint in that spot to match what's around it. All right, but I might soften the edges of that a little bit. I don't want to overlap the color around it. So don't take a brush and brush a patch, basically. I'm just filling in where it's lighter. And that would be hard to find. Same with this blossom up here. This one here is more pronounced around those edges. So I'm just going to take this heart, has a little bit of water in it. I'm just going to hit only where that buildup is. Now, depending on how staining your color is, this will work for almost everything, including staining colors. Because what a blossom is where there's a buildup of paint. And this one, I don't even have to fill in the middle. I can simply just get the ring off. And you may not get it off in the first blot. Just dampen again and repeat. It takes a little patience, but it will get your blossom off of there. If your paint has been sitting for weeks and weeks and weeks, you might have to work at it longer. But this is pretty fresh paint. I do know that this is a color that's lifting pretty easy. Most cobalt and ultramarine blue both will lift pretty easily, so this one's kind of an easy fix. But you can see that mark, that offensive mark there, is gone. And anywhere else where I have kind of a buildup, I can just dampen the area. That's why I'm using such a small brush, because I only want to get the dark where it's built up. Soften the paint and lightly blot. Repeat as needed. And it's a lot of it's a simple process, but don't be in too big of a hurry. Don't be too aggressive. You'll have a better result if you're just a little bit patient. And that has solved that. So you see, anywhere where you have offensive lines or things like that, then you can usually pick up the excess color. So anywhere. So if I want to smooth this out, I would not be able to go over this and get all of these little white spots all exactly the same. This would actually end up looking better if I just focused on where the buildup is and blotted it off. There. So you can see that works great, right? Like, it's pretty straightforward solution, but we always tend to I guess we feel like it's a horrible mess, so we need to take drastic measures, but it really doesn't have to be. So I'm going to zoom out again, and we'll take a look. If I'd made my water even darker, I think I'd like this even better. But I'm happy with it. If I wanted to darken it more, I could. I won't, but if I wanted to, I could go over this again, and like I said, I never work around those little dots again. So I probably have to use some white paint to put those white markings back in. But, I would have to work around this reflection of the bird. But I could darken it. I could darken it and then just use some white paint to put those little white bits back in. But overall, I think it's okay. I didn't get a lot of the texture in the background back here. I could imply some of that if I took a little bit of my shadow color. So a little purple, a little blue. And I could kind of dabble in some that gravelly texture in the background. Try not to actually overlap my rock, but I don't want to avoid the rock either. I didn't put these strange pieces in. I found them just a little distracting, but you can put them in if you want. Anyway, just a little texture back there, just a couple of little dabbles of the dark will do the trick. There's a gigantic machine driving behind the house. It's very noisy. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but they're cutting the grass. Anyway, so there's a little bit of texture for the background, and I think this one's done. So I don't think I need to do any more here. I think if I wanted to clean up the tip of the beak, maybe include that little hook on the end. Didn't get it quite to my liking, but there we go. That'll do. And yeah, so I'm done. And so I will just, I'm going to take a look at the chat here and see if there's anything I've missed. If you got any questions, please ask them now because I'm going soon. Thank you for that reminder about the blossoms. Oh, the paper discussion. Somebody said something about the smell of the paper. There have been a couple of batches of the Arche paper which have been odorific. They have been kind of smelly, and I've had that happen to me a couple of times, but as a rule, like the vast majority is fine. It doesn't give off a smell, but every once in a while I'll get one of those batches where you get the paper wet and it's like, ugh, that's, it smells like a wet dog kind of thing. And someone told me that was because there was a transition from animal sizing, the starch they put on the paper, from animal sizing to vegetable or mineral types sizing. This to me is looking, I'm standing back looking at this going, oh, that looks a little bit high. And I may adjust that a little bit. It's got a little bit of a hump, but I can do that later, just add that little bit in. And let me just see. I find that in terms of paper, I would find that if you work with a particular paper, stick with it. Stick with it. Learn everything about it. Learn how it takes the water, how it lifts. If you don't use it enough, like if you just use it for one project and then write it off, then you haven't learned anything about it. You've just tried it once and it didn't work. Well, you have to get used to it. It's like meeting somebody for the first time. You don't know all their idiosyncrasies, but once you do know all their ins and outs and how they behave, you can react to that. And sometimes what you'll end up with is something that you end up loving, right? So no paper's perfect, but you will find that some will really work better for you for whatever techniques you're using. I know some people who do a lot of lifting techniques. The Arch maybe not be the best option for that because this one's quite absorbent. It's like 100% cotton, very absorbent, and the paint kind of goes into the paper. So if you're one who likes to do a lot of lifting, this might not be the best paper for you. But I do a lot of glazing, so I come in with lots of layers. I don't want to pull the first layers off in an attempt to put on the second or third or fourth layers. So I do like this paper because it holds on to the paint better. So if you're the kind of person who does a lot of correcting, I don't advise that, by the way. But if you do a lot of correcting, you might want a paper that lifts more easily. So anyway, Karen says, thank you, Shelley. I learned some new tricks today. Yay! I'm glad. I'm always happy when I can offer something that you didn't actually have before. So that's a good thing. But I hope I haven't missed any questions. I'm skimming through, and I'm not very good at skimming through, and I'm not a fast reader, so I'm just skimming, and if I haven't seen anything in capitals, so I hope I haven't missed. If I missed a question, ask it again now, because I might miss it if I just try scrolling back. All right. So I'm going to finish this one up then, and thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate it, and I even appreciate your subscribes even more. But I'm so happy that you've come, and I will be back again next week, 10 a.m. Wednesday. That's Toronto time, and we will see you next week. Have a wonderful week. Stay cool. Bye.